This week we're talking about confirmation bias, why nobody understands it, and why nobody really understands where it comes from. Bias is all the rage. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody has bias, allegedly to some degree. The news has bias, people have bias. There's a cultural divide in our country, and both sides have their own bias. Confirmation bias, really, that's what everybody's talking about. There's probably thousands of different kinds of bias, but they're all pretty similar when you actually look at them. I mean, does anybody really know the difference between a rationalization bias and a status quo bias? No, probably not. It all comes down to confirmation bias. And there's something that nobody really understands as important as bias supposedly is in our culture today. Nobody really understands what they're talking about in regards to it. So that's what we're going to clear up in this video. First though, what even is confirmation bias, or we'll just say bias? It's when we use facts to inform our belief system. It's when we use facts instead of using facts to, inform our belief system. I just said that wrong. Instead of using facts to inform, to put facts together into a coherent belief system, we use facts. That's what bias is. We use facts to defend. No matter what the fact is, it doesn't matter. It's always going to somehow fall in line with our belief system. Now that could involve looking only at certain facts, or it can involve looking at facts everybody else looks at, but we just interpret them in our own way to justify. There we go, that's a good word. We use facts to justify our belief system, our ideas, instead of using facts to inform, to build upon one another, to inform our ideas, to inform our belief system. Two totally different things. And I see this all the time. Here we're in the example part of the video. I see this all the time in graduate school. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is seen as the saving grace of the psychological field. Finally, we have a therapy that's scientific. Finally, we have a therapy that works every time. Except when you look at a lot of the research on cognitive behavioral therapy, it doesn't really work that well. It almost never works in the long term. And when it works in the short term, it only works a little bit better than the control group. However, a lot of psychologists latch on to CBT. Why? Because, for starters, they have careers built upon defending these ideas. So if they go back on them now, then they may look stupid. A lot of money is funneled, a lot of research money, taxpayer money, that's your money, is funneled into CBT research. So if they looked at the facts for what they were and they realized, CBT doesn't really work that well, motivational therapy doesn't work that well, then they're going to be less likely to get money. So to look at the facts of reality, for a lot of psychologists who are entrenched in academia psychology, to look at the facts would be tantamount to taking food out of their children's mouths. So they're not going to do it. Maybe they look at all the facts that everybody else does. I've seen psychologists look at the same facts that I do. Look at this study. CBT didn't work, only for a short term, even then barely at all. Look at this study that said that CBT worked. It's been overturned. It hasn't been replicated. And come up with some sort of excuse, some sort of rationalization bias. And you go, in that situation it didn't work because of A, B, and C. It doesn't matter. You'll just come up with reasons why your belief system is true and why the facts, even if the facts aren't wrong, they somehow, at least indirectly, inform your belief system. That's one example. And then, will to power. I think Nietzsche was the first one to talk about confirmation bias. Of course, he didn't call it confirmation bias at the time. He called it something much cooler, will to power, which is not the will to fascism, which is not the will to Nazism. He was just describing, it was a descriptive ethics. He was explicating what he saw. It wasn't normative. Doesn't mean normative. Look up what normative means. He was talking about a descriptive ethical code of most people. And that is to develop ideas that would be best suited for them, best suited for who they are. So a great example of the will to power is you look back at historical opinions on legalized prostitution. Now, the two groups who have been routinely in favor of legalized prostitution are high-status men and low-status women. Why? Because it offers more opportunities, let's say, for the high-status men and more opportunities for the low-status women. Now, they're going to be much more likely to meet high-status men. And the two groups who have been typically routinely against legalized prostitution are high-status women and low-status men. High-status women because prostitution, it distracts their husbands, and low-status men, prostitution, it distracts their future mating opportunities. Now, when a high-status woman is talking about her disagreement with prostitution, she's not going to talk about, oh, well, it's going to take my husband away. She's going to come up with highfalutin terms about morals and ethics and cleanliness and this and that. But it's all going to be a justification for her bias. It's really important that we understand that that's what's going on. Not in the past. This isn't describing a past occurrence. This is exactly what's going on now. But where people don't really understand bias, well, nobody even talks about this. As much as we talk about bias and confirmation bias and CNN this and Fox News that, whatever, nobody really talks about where bias comes from, because nobody really knows where it comes from. What is the cause of bias? Why do we have bias? We almost treat it like we choose to have bias. But when we look at it, psychologically speaking, what is it? It is a self-protection mechanism, true. Is a way we protect our preconceived notion about who we are, about who the world is, true. But what is self-protection? What's another word for that? Of course, avoidance. Being biased, seeking facts that fit your worldview, looking at facts and doing the mental gymnastics, rearranging them in your mind to fit your worldview. That is all a way of saying that's an avoidance technique. It's a way to avoid anxiety. The anxiety of, my belief about the world may not be correct. My belief about global warming, climate change, whatever. Whether you're in favor, whether you think it's real or whether you think it's a hoax, chances are you're both biased, at least to some degree. And if that belief isn't true, then I have to question other beliefs. This causes a lot of anxiety. I want to avoid this anxiety, so I'm simply going to turn away from it. And what do we know about avoidance behaviors? Well, they can be conscious at first, but eventually, obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, they will happen automatically. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about bias is it happens automatically. We have a lot of bias in our culture today. I don't know if it's worse than any other time. Let's just say it is, right? For the sake of making today of a current American 2019 culture sound worse than it is, more doomsdayish than it is, let's just say it's worse now than ever before. But why would that be? Not because we're choosing to have bias, but because we have anxiety. And when we have anxiety, we will unconsciously have bias. It's going to happen automatically. That's what we need to understand about our psychology. After a certain point, the addiction, whatever it is, the compulsive behavior, it becomes automatic, and bias is no different. It becomes automatic. So how do we manage bias? Well, we don't manage the bias at first, right? What do we start doing first? We start getting comfortable feeling this. We start bringing our anxiety up into our consciousness. There's no dotted line there, but you can just imagine I drew it in. You bring it up into the ellipse of discomfort, the ellipse of anxiety. If you don't know how anxiety works, click in the description. There's links to my anxiety video. And we get better at feeling it. We get better at feeling, oh, maybe some of my beliefs are incorrect. Oh, maybe CBT, it's not the end-all, be-all of psychology. Maybe CBT is, in fact, preventing a more cohesive, a more unified, systematized theory of psychology from being propagated. That's what would really make therapy universal and ultimately the most effective. And when we start confronting it, and what would confronting look like, what would confronting anxiety look like in the context of bias, is we take all our deeply held, cherished beliefs and just sort of turn them upside down and then defend that upside down idea. And this is what Nietzsche ultimately talks about when becoming an Übermensch, an overman. He doesn't talk about stepping over people. He's just talking about developing some sort of relationship with reality, right? You're God, everybody's God. We develop some sort of relationship with reality. That is what the Übermensch does. He overcomes his bias and he just has the guts to look reality, to look the truth square in the face. And that's what we need to do to overcome our bias. So really, the ultimate bias, it's not really a bias anymore, it's reality bias, is what does reality say? And I would argue the best way to do that is not to read Nietzsche so much. He doesn't really give you a good step-by-step epistemological device for becoming in touch with reality. He just says that reality is out there and let's get in touch with it. I mean, that was the point of existentialism in the first place. Really, if you want to do that philosophically, is you read Aristotle. Nobody's going to want to do that, though. If you don't want to do that, which you probably don't. If you have a girlfriend, you don't want to do that. Then start managing anxiety, and it's going to start to happen naturally. You're going to be more comfortable with yourself apart from your beliefs. Why? Because you're taking unconscious anxiety, using it in an effective way. And what do there? You patch up the holes in your boundary. You make your identity more solid. And then with a more solid psychological identity, you're much more comfortable to look at even a deeply cherished belief and go, well, maybe this is completely incorrect. That's all for this week. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this helped. Please like and subscribe right down there. And always remember to completely overcome your bias, and especially overcome your bias when it comes to things like your psychological health.